Hi all. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about a library that I wrote, and this library is called Protos. What the Protos library does, it gives you access to a way of writing Elixir protocols that I think is more ergonomic and easier to read and easier to find your code, especially if you're somebody that is not coming from the Elixir ecosystem, somebody who may be onboarding from another programming language where they're kind of used to a different way of doing things. So let's go ahead and show you how this works. So in order to use the Protos library, you just need to add it to your deps and everything will be brought in as expected. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what it looks like to use a protocol in the normal way in Elixir. So in Elixir, you define a protocol which will create a module of the same name. And this module contains functions that are defined by the predicates that you put in inside of the protocol body. So in this case, what we're saying is we're declaring that we're going to create a rush function that takes some data type that has an implementation of the protocol. And all we're guaranteeing is that any data type that implements the Zerg protocol will have the rush function attached to it. So in this case, what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you specializing based off of Elixir structs. So let's create an Elixir struct. In this case, we're going to create a Zergling struct as GitHub Copilot suggested. And we're going to give it, say, some HP and some attack values. These doesn't really matter. And note that we declare an implementation of Zerg inside of the Zergling module. One thing you note is that this clause here is optional. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And what we're saying is we are implementing the Zerg protocol for the zerg.zergling module. And this is what the rush function for that implementation is going to look like. So what happens when I run this code? First, what we're going to do is we're going to create a zerg.zergling struct. And as you can see, it got the default values. And then what happens when we zerg.rush, and v is like the answer key on your calculator. It's whatever the previous value was. Note that when we called zerg.rush, it knew that v was a zerg.zergling struct, and so it forwarded it to this, this function. Okay, so what we're going to next do is we're going to create yet a different module. And let's see what zerg.hydralisk. Okay. And just like the zerg.zergling module or struct, we're going to have an implementation of Zerg that's a little bit different. In this case, it's going to say hydralisk instead of zergling. So let's compile this and run it. So if I make a zerg.hydralisk struct, right, and then now I call zerg.rush on that value, it knows that, hey, I got a zerg.hydralisk struct, and then when you call this rush function, it's automatically filled out to be able to specialize on either this implementation in the case of the zergling and this implementation for the hydralisk. So for completeness, let's take a look at zergling. And let's do a zerg.rush. And sure enough, it knew that it was a zergling because it knew that I was passing this sort of a struct into that function. For completeness, I'm going to also mention that you can do it this way for zerg.hydralist. And the reason why this form exists is suppose you were creating a protocol for a struct that somebody else has created. For example, datetime or range, which are structs that exist already in the Elixir standard library. You're not going to be able to jump into the module code for those particular structs because that already exists elsewhere as defined in the standard library. So what protocols in general allow you to do is to create sort of post hoc implementations for arbitrary protocols. And that's why we can do this def impl on the outside of the module in addition to being on the inside of the module. Now, the thing that I don't love is this can be a lot of boilerplate and hard to read and hard to understand. And also, maybe what you don't know is where exactly does this function exist? So let's take a look at the zerg.zergling module. And I'm going to try and tab complete here, and you can see it's not showing me anything. So let's do module info. And you can see nowhere in the exports tables do we see this rush function. Where is this rush function? Well, actually, it's in this module. There's a module called zerg.zerg.zergling. And you can see that there's a rush function there. So let's module info this. And you can see in this module, there's an export which corresponds to the rush function. So what has happened is that Elixir has helpfully concatenated the Zerg protocol name here with the name of the module whose struct we are creating the implementation for. And that is the place where all of these functions get stashed. And maybe I'm just being opinionated, but I think that's a little bit of indirection. You don't see that this is explicit. You kind of have to know that that's what's going on. And it can get a little bit tricky to debug. And it can also get tricky to find these if you happen to be putting, for example, these implementation modules in a different file from where your actual structs are. So let me show you basically what Protos lets you do. So to convert this to a Protos implementation, what we're going to do is we're going to do use Protos here. Now, the next thing we're going to be able to do is we're just going to be able to say use Zerg, which says that this module that has this struct is going to implement the Zerg protocol. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this extra module and instead have the rush function already be in the same module as the zerg.zergling. So let's clear this and let's recompile. And now let's create a zerg.zergling function. And also pass that into zerg.rush. And of course, it does exactly the same thing. Under the hood, what Protos is doing is it is creating an implementation module, but it is hiding it. And then inside the implementation module, it's really just taking all of the key functions inside of the protocol and forwarding them back to the parent module using def-delegate. So the reasons why I like this is, for starters, we are staying within the Elixir convention of all of your functions having the data type that it cares about be the first parameter of the function. So this is kind of like a natural, we expect all of the functions, or most of the functions in zerg.zergling to take zerg.zergling as their first parameter. And of course, being a protocol, that is consistent with this. And secondly, it makes it much easier for you to see the code that's going on. And the expectation, if you ask me, is that if you're running a protocol, then you would expect it to have forwarded to the module that is the parent module for the struct. I think this is much easier to read. Your opinions may vary, but I think especially if you are showing this code to somebody who has never seen Elixir before, comes from maybe more of a C++ or Python or Ruby or other programming language background, this sort of a indirection makes a lot more sense than spawning another module that has a hidden concatenation. And the nice thing is that if we do zerg.zergling .module info, we can see that the rush function is there, and in fact, that rush function is what we expect. Okay, so that is the first function of Protos. There are actually two more superpowers to protocols that I've included inside of the Protos module. So the second superpower that I've bundled into Protos is the ability to create special types of functions which take a module that implements the protocol and forwards those in. So let me give you an example. This is motivated by the fact that I often wind up implementing this in many of my projects. So the big example is something called from JSON. So let me show you what that looks like. So in the protocol module, I would write something called def delegate from JSON. It's going to take a module and JSON data. And that's it. Now, in the Protos grand scheme of things, how would this get forwarded and implemented by the modules? Well, here we would have def from JSON. And instead of taking two parameters, because we know where the module is coming from, it would only take JSON data. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to return module. And lovely, it looks like GitHub autocomplete is doing the right thing. So let's take a look at what this looks like when we compile it. So in this case, what I would do is I would do zerg.fromJSON, zerg.zergling, and let's give it the JSON that we expect. So HP 5, attack 15. And now we've instantiated the correct zerg.zergling struct. Of course, if we had a different module, then what we could do is we could direct activity to that module instead, using the same from JSON interface by providing the module that we want to construct and the relevant JSON data for whatever that struct needs to use. So I found this to be incredibly useful in several projects that I have in production, and so you might like it as well. Now, there's one more superpower that I have included in the Protos package, and I'll go over that next. Okay, so the third thing that I bundled in with Protos is what I call the ability to create normal functions inside of a protocol. So if we weren't using Protos, so let me just comment this out for a second, and I wanted to create a normal function. Also comment that out. So let's say we want to do a super rush function. And what I want the super rush function to do is I want to do io.puts superrush and then call rush on that function, on that value. So we're seeing that I'm getting this red thing. There's no such import. If I try to compile this, it's not going to be happy. I can't write a def function inside of this Zerg module, even though it's, a module just like any other. And you can see how this might be important, because suppose I have a Zergling module and a Hydralisk module. And if I wanted to kind of do this within the sort of bounds of normal Elixir, I would have to create a superrush function in the protocol, or declare the superrush function. And then in each of the modules that has a Zerg implementation, I would need to go and do io.put superrush and then call rush on the same module. And that's going to get really messy. There's going to be no guarantees that it's doing the same thing each time. And alternatively, I could create a wrapping function for a Zerg, which would also allow you to do that, and just wrap every single one of those functions. That just gets also rather messy. So wouldn't it be nice if we could just create basically naked functions inside of your protocols? Well, so Protos lets you do that. And the way you do that is you declare an after block. So in an after block, it's going to take all of everything after the after block is a normal module block, as if these functions were all inside of the module. Everything above the fold has to match up with either the normal protocol things, as in this def statement here, or has to be the def delegate special form that I have for Protos. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So first I'm going to make a zerg.zergling variable, and that's going to be just a struct. And if we do zerg.rush z, we're going to get the normal zergling rush. And if we do zerg.superrush, you can see that it has injected this superrush IO statement in there. So you can really put any old function in here. It doesn't just have to be one that encapsulates one of the protocol modules. But just to show you something that I do in many times in my code is now I'm doing something where I have the protocol have the sort of normal function be in the after block, and I wind up having a semi-private implementation here, for example, as part of the protocol body. And so each of the structs that is implementing the Zerg protocol would create this implementation, and all the common surrounding code on the outside is actually part of the public interface for the Zerg protocol. Okay, so this is a little bit of inside ball, and I think the reason why you might want to use this is if you've seen and had similar frustrations to me in building out easy to understand Elixir code, especially for people who are coming from outside of the Elixir universe. Plus, it's nice because when you can, you might as well put some functions into this thing. This is a module instead of having to make more than one modules, just to be able to have like wrapping functions that wrap protocol implementations and something consistent. Okay, so that's what I have. The other important thing to know is that in no way does Protos affect the normal way that Elixir does protocols. You can mix and match. You can have some protocols that use the Protos scheme and some protocols that use the non-Protos scheme. Nothing gets changed. And under the hood, the way that that Protos works is exactly the same as the way that a protocol works, just that it's giving you this extra piece and the extra after piece. And all it's doing is injecting those things in as the function implementations that you would expect inside of the protocol module. So that's all I got. Hope you enjoy using Protos. The current version, which is version 0.2, is considered to be by me to be a release candidate. So when we go to 1.0, I will probably also transfer it off of my personal GitHub into the GitHub that I use for my more polished projects. Okay, hope you find this to be useful.